Mexico was very concerned about what the bilateral relationship would be like under a Trump administration, and there have been significant changes over the past year. The biggest change has been the pressure from the Trump administration on the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador to crack down on immigration. The López Obrador administration had promised a different attitude toward immigration that would accept Central Americans fleeing conditions of violence and hunger in their home countries and integrate them into society, allow them safe passage so they weren't prey to organized crime. And immediately the Trump administration really shut that down. And so now we have a situation where there's a crackdown within Mexico. Mexico is deporting a record number of individuals. There's massive violations of human rights, and they accepted the Remain in Mexico program on the border. Other than that, it's been a very tense relationship that's been covered up by this real cordial attitude between the two presidents, almost as if they were best friends, despite the fact that Donald Trump, from way back in his campaign, consistently criticized Mexico, the Mexican people, Mexican migrants, and the government for corruption, for immigration, as criminals, in fact, when speaking about Mexican migrants, a number of insults after insults. And yet the López Obrador administration has decided that they're going to keep things cool and just try to survive the Trump administration.
What about the border wall? Trump famously promising Mexico will pay for it. Have they been paying for it?
No, but they've certainly been paying for the concept. Mexico has been very firm in saying we're obviously not paying for a border wall that we don't believe in. But the threat of building that border wall and the whole image that somehow Mexico and immigrants that come up through Mexico are a threat to U.S. national security has really cost Mexico in many different ways. One of them, the one I mentioned, the pressure to crack down on immigration at great expense and also in certain ways a violation of the principles that this administration began with, but also because it has created a rise in hate crimes against Mexicans in the United States. Everyone remembers the massacre in El Paso that was focused on Mexicans. And it's also created economic instability because of the different threats that are related to immigration.
I want to talk about violence. 2019 has been a particularly violent year for Mexico, and President López Obrador has struggled to contain some of that violence, but it has had a cross-border element. We know a lot of the guns in Mexico come from the U.S. There were a number of American nationals killed in Mexico, specifically a family there in one of the more violent incidents that prompted the Trump administration to suggest labeling the Mexican cartels as terrorist groups. The State Department this month putting out a travel advisory for Mexico, but I do believe that more Mexican nationals were killed in the U.S. this year than the other way around. How is that being played out there?
That's true. And again, we have a problem of warring images going on here. The problem of violence in Mexico is very serious. There's no doubt about that. We're facing a record year in terms of homicides at a time when, according to the promises of the new government and the hopes of many people of the change in the security model, there would be a decrease in homicides, and the reverse is happening. This has always been a direct result of the drug war policy of the United States government and the Mexican government in the past, which put armed forces and police in the streets to fight cartels, causing the cartels to fragment and increasing the number of turf wars in the country. What the government is trying to do is reduce the violence by going to the long-term causes, including unemployment and the lack of education in the country, but obviously that doesn't have immediate results. And they're also trying to point out on many occasions that this is not a Mexican problem exclusively, that the money laundering, the arms smuggling into Mexico from the United States are all parts of the problem, and that these are transnational organized crime groups that actually have their market where they make their money and they're able to arm themselves in the United States. Instead of looking to Mexico to focus all the firepower here, the United States should be doing its part within its own territory.